You won't believe what happened when this old black woman with nothing but a sack walked into a bank, claiming it was hers. The staff laughed at her, thinking it was just some crazy old woman making wild accusations. But what they didn't know was that this was no ordinary claim. This was a moment that would change everything. It all started on a quiet morning when the woman, dressed simply and carrying her sack, stepped into the bank with a determined look in her eyes. She walked up to the counter and told the clerk, "This bank, it's mine." Of course, they scoffed at her, dismissing her as just another eccentric character with a big story. But as she continued to speak with confidence, they began to realize that this wasn't some random claim. She knew things about the bank that no one else could have known. The laughter stopped, but it was too late. Things began to spiral out of control, and soon no one was laughing anymore. What happened next left everyone stunned, as the truth slowly began to surface. Was she really telling the truth all along? Or was this just an unbelievable coincidence? Stay tuned as we dive deeper into this unbelievable story. As the woman stood there, the bank staff exchanged puzzled glances, unsure of how to handle the situation. The clerk, trying to maintain a professional demeanor, politely asked for her account number. But the woman just smiled and shook her head. "I don't need to show you any number," she replied calmly. "I'm the one who owns this place. You just don't know it yet." This didn't sit right with the bank employees, who were trained to deal with all sorts of customers, but nothing like this. They thought she was just confused, maybe a little lost in the city. But the more they spoke to her, the more they realized that she wasn't just spouting nonsense. Her details about the bank's inner workings were chillingly accurate, down to the smallest things. It was as if she knew things that only someone who had been there from the very beginning could possibly know. They tried to brush her off, asking her to leave, but she didn't budge. She stood there, unmoving, waiting for someone to listen. Her calm demeanor only added to the unease in the room. Meanwhile, the other customers in the bank were starting to take notice of the scene unfolding before them. Whispers started to spread, and it wasn't long before the manager was called in. But even he wasn't prepared for what was about to unfold. Would they finally take her seriously? Or would they keep laughing until it was too late? As the manager entered, he looked around, his eyes immediately landing on the woman with the sack. He had dealt with all kinds of strange situations in his years at the bank, but this one was different. Something about her presence made him uneasy. He forced a smile and approached her, trying to remain calm. "Ma'am, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding," he said, his voice measured. "We're happy to help, but we need to clear this up. Could you please tell me your name?" The woman didn't respond right away. Instead, she pulled something from the sack, an old weathered document. It looked like a deed, its edges frayed, but the bank's official logo was unmistakable. She handed it to the manager without saying a word. He hesitated before taking it, unsure of what he was looking at. As he scanned the document, his face grew pale. The text on the paper seemed to confirm her claim, at least partially. It was an old contract, dated back decades, listing her as the rightful owner of the building. The manager's heart started to race. He knew the history of the bank, and this document shouldn't exist. There was no record of it in their files. The woman seemed to sense his growing uncertainty. She didn't look smug or triumphant, just calm, almost serene. "I've been waiting for a long time," she said quietly, her voice carrying an air of finality. "It's time for you to pay what you owe." Around the room, whispers began to rise. Some of the customers were curious, others skeptical. But there was one thing that everyone in the room could feel. The tension was thick, and something was about to break. The manager quickly excused himself, retreating to his office with the document. He needed to figure out what was going on, but the more he thought about it, the more impossible it seemed. Could this be some elaborate hoax? Or was she telling the truth? Meanwhile, the woman stood there, waiting patiently, her sack still clutched tightly in her hands. Time seemed to stretch, each passing second heavier than the last. What was she really after, and why had she come here now? The manager sat in his office, the old documents spread out in front of him. His fingers trembled as he ran his hand over the faded paper. This couldn't be real, could it? He had seen countless contracts and deeds in his years, but nothing like this. The name on the document, the address, outside, the atmosphere in the bank had shifted. The employees were no longer laughing or dismissing her as a mad woman. They, too, were starting to wonder if there was more to the situation than they had first realized. One of the tellers pulled up the bank's historical records, trying to find anything that could explain this mystery. What they discovered only made things worse. There were no references to the document in their system, and worse, no record of the building's original ownership. It was as if the bank had simply appeared out of nowhere decades ago. The tension in the air was palpable. The customers who had initially watched with curiosity now seemed to sense something bigger was unfolding. Some started to whisper among themselves, others eyed the door as if considering leaving, but no one dared to move. The manager returned from his office, his face pale. He knew he couldn't ignore this anymore. The woman's quiet presence was like a weight pressing down on everyone, and the longer he waited, the more he could feel the walls closing in. He walked toward her slowly, unsure of what he was going to say, but knowing he couldn't keep pretending this was some misunderstanding. When he finally reached her, the woman didn't speak immediately. She just looked at him, as if waiting for him to come to the only conclusion that made sense. The silence in the room felt unbearable. Every eye in the bank was on them now, every person holding their breath. Finally, the manager cleared his throat, trying to steady his nerves. "I've looked over the document," he said, his voice faltering slightly. "But there's something I need to understand. How could you have known about this? How could you have known about the original deed?" The woman's eyes locked onto his, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something in her gaze, a depth, a knowing that sent a shiver down his spine. "Because I'm the one who signed it," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of centuries. The room seemed to freeze. Every person in the bank felt it, the air thickening, the tension building, the undeniable truth that they were standing at the edge of something far greater than anyone had imagined. The room seemed to hold its breath as the woman's words hung in the air, her quiet admission sending shockwaves through everyone present. The manager's heart raced as he tried to process what she had just said. You signed the deed," he repeated, his voice barely audible. The woman didn't reply right away. Instead, she reached into her sack once again, pulling out another piece of paper. This one was crisp, fresh, and much newer than the weathered deed she had shown him earlier. She handed it to him without a word. This time, the paper wasn't some old relic. It was a modern legal document, with the same bank's name at the top, but something was different. It was a transfer of ownership. The signature at the bottom was unmistakable, his. The manager's stomach dropped. He hadn't signed anything like this. Or had he? He racked his brain, trying to recall any recent meetings or paperwork, but nothing came to mind. The room erupted into murmurs as the staff and customers began to piece together the implications. Some of the customers whispered about their own experiences with the bank, how they had always felt something was off, how it never seemed right. The manager's mind was spinning. How was this possible? What was going on? Before he could even gather his thoughts, the woman spoke again, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I was the one who sold it, and I've come back to take it back." Her eyes glimmered with an intensity that sent chills down the manager's spine. Suddenly, one of the tellers gasped. She had been frantically searching through the bank's archives, trying to verify the documents, and now she had found something that made her face turn white. "There's more," she whispered, almost in disbelief. "There's a second deed, a duplicate deed, one with your name on it, signed by someone else." The room went silent again. A duplicate deed. The tension in the air reached a breaking point. How could this be happening? Was someone at the bank involved in forging documents? Or was there a darker, more twisted truth to uncover? The manager felt the walls closing in around him, and the weight of the woman's words settled heavily on his shoulders. This was no longer just about a mistake. It was about something much bigger, something he hadn't been prepared for. As he glanced back at the woman, she gave him a small, knowing smile. It was as if she already knew how this story would end, and maybe, just maybe, she had been waiting for him to catch up.